G'day there, Paul here from down under and I'm sitting in the caravan that we have to tell you a little bit about the book of Daniel. What an amazing man this was. Young Daniel, first he was born about 625 years before Jesus Christ was born, and he was only a teenager when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, and he told his chief of staff out there to bring back some of the young men that they could be trained to serve in the king's palace and in the administration of Babylonia. So Daniel was actually chosen along with Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego to go back in the first group of exiles out of Jerusalem. When they took the cream, they took all the business people, all the sharp minds, all the teachers, and they took them back, and Daniel was then put into training for 3 years to learn the language, learn the customs, learn the rules, and he excelled in his training and was accepted to work for the king. Now here's a man who was also very faithful to God all of his life, and during his first exile he was going to be fattened up like the rest of the staff of the king, but he refused. As you remember, he refused to eat the meat and defile his body, and so he and his comrades had made a deal with the man who was in charge of them to say, look, give me 10 days just on fruit and vegetables and I'll show you. You compare our bodies with the other people you're feeding and I'll show you that we have actually got a better diet. And so he was able to prevail in keeping his body from being defiled by eating the meat of the Babylonians. And of course today we have many people now following the Daniel's diet and keeping their bodies pure. But Daniel served all of his life in exile. He never went back to Jerusalem. And so you've got in the Jeremiah, he was the prophet who prophesied to the Jews in Judah. Ezekiel prophesied to the captives in Babylon. But Daniel prophesied in the courts of the foreign kings, and there were many kings that followed Nebuchadnezzar that also used the giftings that Daniel had in hearing from God and being able to interpret dreams. So in chapter 2 of Daniel we got the first prophecy that we read about there, and this is when King Nebuchadnezzar was getting very worried. He had this dream that really bothered him. This monster, this great statue appeared in his dream with all different parts like the golden head and the iron legs, etc. And he told his organisers to get the magicians and the seers of the temple and ask them what he dreamt. He couldn't tell them what he dreamt. He didn't remember actually, but he said, if they can tell me what I dreamt and what it was all about, then he said, I'll spare their lives. Wow, even Daniel was going to be killed if this original decree went ahead. But Daniel was bold enough to go to the king and say, give me some time and I'll ask my God if I can get an interpretation of your dream. So during the night, here in chapter 2 verse 19, during the night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. And down in chapter 2 verse 26, the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these. And then he went on in verse 32. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly of thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet of partly of iron and partly baked of clay. And while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze and the silver and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on the threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So this is Daniel's interpretation given to him by God. In verse 44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. And how he explained the statue was that the golden head was Nebuchadnezzar, and after him would come a silver chest and arms, and then a bronze. They would represent different kingdoms that would follow through, and that's exactly what happened as time passed. All of these different kingdoms came to be, but they all were diminished in quality and effectiveness from gold down to iron and clay in the feet. So that was in chapter 2. When we go to chapter 3, we get trouble coming to Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, because they would not bow down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar had managed to put up and ask people, all of his subjects, to bow down to. And so then, you know the story, they were going to be thrown into the fiery furnace and burnt. But they said to the king, but even if, verse 18 of chapter 3, but even if he does not, this is if the God will save us, even if he does not, we wanted you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. So no matter what, they were not going to give up their faith. Great men of God. And of course, they were thrown into the fiery furnace. The soldiers that threw them into the furnace were burnt up. The ropes that had them bound were burnt, but the very hairs on their body were not touched. And whilst they were in there was a fourth man. The king looked in and he saw that there's a fourth man in the fiery furnace. And of course we know who that represents.